Last week, we opened the series by surveying a handful of people who have asked this question that we're approaching: who is Jesus? We spoke of physician and scientist Dr. Francis Collins and his journey of being a young scientist and a doctor and into his 20s and late 20s, engaging with patients and realizing that there was something about the joy that they experienced in their suffering that was different than other patients. And so he did this pursuit, and he's been following Jesus for 40 years now and has been a great testament to Jesus and the community at large. And so we discussed investigative journalist and Yale-trained lawyer Lee Strobel, and we looked at his 2-year investigation of the claims of Jesus. He was, by his own words, was a committed atheist, his words, obnoxious atheist. And in God's humor, as I said last week, his wife Leslie became a follower of Jesus and got baptized in their late 20s. And so it led Lee to kind of go, I'm gonna debunk this. I'm gonna debunk the resurrection. And so after a 2-year focus, after claiming in public, in writing as a journalist, that Christianity was full of wishful thinking, filled with legends and irrationalities, after his wife came to faith, he went on this long journey and met with medical professionals and scholars of antiquity. And after 2 exhaustive years at the age of 29, he had to come to, based on the evidence, this reality. And he said this: the evidence for Jesus' life, death, and resurrection was so strong that to ignore the evidence required more faith to remain an atheist than to believe in Christianity. And then at the end of our talk, we finished John 5 and Luke 24, and we let Jesus speak about who he thought he was. And so we talked to the Pharisees and the disciples, and it was a powerful ending. And so as today, as promised, what we're going to do is we're going to explore Lee Strobel. When I just mentioned this investigative journalist, he then wrote a book called The Case for Christ. What we're going to do is we're going to explore the 4 areas of inquiry that he used. Some call this the 4 E's. It's just a framework. And they're this: the execution of Jesus, the early witness accounts of Jesus' resurrection, the empty tomb, and the eyewitness accounts. In addition, we're going to take a very quick look before we jump into that about the reliability of the Bible that we have in front of us, with the hopes that at the end of our gathering time, we'll hopefully get close to an answer of what the execution of Jesus, the early accounts, the empty tomb, and the eyewitnesses say about who Jesus was and is. And so again, this is to bolster our faith. Some of these things you guys have done the work, and you're like, oh, I know that. Some of you did this work 10, 15 years ago, and you're like, oh, this is interesting. But it's going to be helpful for us to revisit and to be encouraged in our faith. Does that sound good? All right. Are we okay? Are we awake? All right. All right. I know let's pray. Jesus, we trust you. We love you. Again, we do lift up those who are feeling sick today and aren't able to be with us. We pray for this room as well, that we're aware and awake to the fact that the Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is here and present in each of us. And so would you move in us now? But again, most importantly, Lord, may we pay attention to you and be encouraged and challenged. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen. So when I started college in the 90s, some of you going, hey, I wasn't born yet. When I started college in the 90s, I started as a philosophy major. And I still have wonderful memories of sitting around and discussing Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And I was at a Christian school as well, though, so had a very strong philosophy department in the master's program that was connected with a different school. But we would sit around and talk about all kinds of fun and exciting things as a group of people. We talked about epistemology, the study and understanding of knowledge, and we talked about ethics and where those come from. It was just powerful to read the ancient philosophers, see how they influence culture. And so we would talk about all kinds of things. We'd wrestle with Plato's highest form of good, the idea that the highest level of good sheds light on justice and beauty. And so we'd sit and as a school that had followers of Jesus, it was interesting to have this conversation. It was always powerful. But as I look back on that time, not once in any of the discussion in any class or any after class argument in the lunch area or out at a park, like never once did the statement ever come up of did Plato really exist? Like it just never came up. It was assumed, of course Plato exists. Of course Socrates and Aristotle and all the great philosophers exist because they did. And so never the question came up once of how do we know these things. I'll get to that comment in a minute. I look at other historians who talk about different people or people in history that mean something or had a significant influence, like Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar might be one of the most influential people, for good or bad, mainly bad, but a lot of good too, in history. And he was, if you don't know, he was a Roman general. He transformed the Roman Republic into an empire. And if that doesn't sound familiar, Julius Caesar's the guy that like a bunch of senators got around, like 60 of them, and 20 of them stabbed him. And 40 people watched. And it was some of his allies and friends who set him up. And so if you don't remember that from high school, you should go back and read that story because it's brutal. But this really incredibly powerful and influential person in history, we have all these facts about him. But again, if you took a world history class in high school, or you took a classics class in college, I put all the money that I have in my savings account, which is not much, but I would put it down to say, never once did the question come up, ever. Did Julius Caesar exist? It's just not one that would come up in that. And so you might be asking already, kind of say, Matt, can you get to your point? Because I'm not understanding, and I think that's appropriate. So here's my point. Although we have some historical writings about Julius Caesar, for example, outside of his own writings, the fact of the matter is that his most famous work, the Gallic Wars, the earliest copy we have of his writings are 900 years after he existed. 9th century, 900 years. There's not a papyri or a manuscript anywhere before that time of his writings. And so because we have other writings of historians, we can kind of place him. But of his own writings, we have something that's quite far from it. Plato's famous work, The Republic. If you haven't read it, I think it'd be good for you to. It's great work. It was written in 375 BC, so a long time before Jesus. We have a handful of manuscripts, but the first one we have is, again, the 9th century, so about 12 or 1300 years. We have, and you might already know this because it keeps growing every decade or so, we have 5,800, actually 5,883 if we want to be super accurate, but we have 5,800 New Testament manuscripts. If you add Syriac and you add Latin and you add Coptic and you add Armenian, we have close to 25,500 manuscripts and papyri dating back to 125 AD. Within 95 years of Jesus' existence. We have what I like to call, the official way of saying it is we have a stupid amount, I'm kidding. We have a crazy amount of evidence and material from very close to the life of Jesus. And yet, ongoingly, even now in modern times, we still have people questioning the existence of Jesus. Did he even exist? And what is the evidence that he did the things that he did? I want to submit to you something that's not really salacious or too powerful, but I just think it's good for us to hear every once in a while because the noise outside of us is loud. But in believing and non-believing circles in the peer-to-peer reviewed religious world, which is all seminaries, all universities, secular universities, I don't like that word, but mainstream and Christian, this is a true statement that would be made. That the New Testament is by far the most well-preserved ancient set of documents that there's ever been in the history of humanity. By a stupid amount. So anyone who studies classics, anyone who studies history, they're not having that conversation on YouTube of did Jesus exist or do we really have any evidence? They're trying to grapple with what does it mean? Because the reason they've gotten into it, whether they're apologies or not, is because they're fascinated with this reality. All that to say, there's so much more I could share, but for now, the point of that as we step into the 4 E's was to do nothing. It wasn't to prime you. It wasn't to manipulate you. It was just to let us sit in comfort. That was actually my heart. I want us to, before we start this, I want to just sit in comfort that we have incredibly reliable documents in the New Testament. I've dedicated my whole life to this. And I've dedicated my life, some of you know this, because I was a skeptic coming in as a late teenager. I was convinced that this was all made up. I was convinced that what my parents were a part of was just nonsense until I actually started to do the work and I started to see that, not only did he exist, but there's eyewitness accounts of what he did. So I hope that you feel encouraged and challenged today. And so as before, we're going to quickly unpack the Strobel's 4E framework. Now, there's a ton of foundational research that Strobel in his own book says. I didn't come up with this, but he is the one who came up with the framework of the 4Es, and it's been something he's been really helpful for a lot. So with that said, our goal is to pay close attention to these. And here they are really quick, just in case it'd be helpful to set you up. The framework consists of this: execution. Jesus was actually dead after crucifixion. There are some who say that he was not. Early accounts is the second one. Belief in the resurrection started early. It's not a later myth. It's very popular, not in the again, peer-to-peer reviewed scholarly world, but in the popular level world, it's just easy to say, oh, that started in the 4th century, and yet we have clarity of documents. We're going to talk about that. The empty tomb. The tomb was empty with no body to refute the claim. And 4, eyewitnesses. A plethora of people claim to have seen Jesus alive after his death. So we're going to lean right in. Number 1, if you're taking notes, execution. Jesus was actually dead after crucifixion. One of the theories that came about in the early 1800s was something called the swoon theory. It pops its head every once in a while, but it's been pretty strongly disputed, but it does come up every once in a while. The swoon theory hypothesized that Jesus did not actually die on the cross, but he merely fainted. He swooned. One of those theories you can kind of laugh at, but it's important for us to just take one each at account and kind of look at it. So after his injuries, the idea is that he revived in the tomb. He rested a little bit, breathed, moved an incredibly big rock, and so he wasn't really dead. So again, the idea is he fainted from a loss of blood and pain. Here's the deal. Strobel appropriately points out that the Romans were pretty good at killing people. Like, the Romans could pretty much in history say, hey, we kind of know what we're doing, other than a couple of ancient near Mesopotamian groups that we've talked about before. The Romans are up there. They're like in the top 3 of killing people, maybe number 1. And so one of those things that they're known for is killing people. Almost unanimously, because there's always someone out there. I counted 4 this week, and it took me a lot of work to find them. And they are not at reputable universities, nor do they have many peer-to-peer review articles, because peer-to-peer means your scholars can actually come back, so they have a lot of popular level. But almost unanimously, modern scholars, followers of Jesus, or not, point to the swoon theory as having zero evidence or lacking significant evidence on the historical and medical realities. Not just the historical, but the medical realities. Firstly, the swoon theory cannot account for the severity of Roman crucifixion, which was in its very purpose designed for death. It was designed for embarrassment, but it absolutely was designed for death. We learn from Seneca the Young in his letters about the long and drawn-out agony and humiliation of Roman crucifixion. So these are ancient historians writing about Roman crucifixion. When you read Cicero, you see him reference the Roman crucifixion as the worst phenomenon, and he goes on to describe the agony and pain of someone on a cross. Jewish historian Josephus writes at length about mass murder by Roman crucifixion. This isn't something we read in the Bible and then extrapolate and go, oh, we made this up. This is in history, just like the Bible is in history. Other ancient historians of the time describe how a Roman soldier would ensure a crucified person was dead. We have these documents written down. A soldier would typically employ 2 main activities after the intense flogging before a person was put on a cross. So before they put them on a cross, they would beat them almost to death. And then they would display them on the side of a road, usually. In some of the movies, it's in these big mountaintops, and it's this big scene, and the reality is it was just on the side of the road where they put excrement from people. It was humiliation and a purpose of death. So after the flogging, they would break the victim's legs to rush the process of asphyxiation. And if necessary, because that was usually what would kill people on the cross, was asphyxiation. If necessary, they would pierce the chest directly into the heart with a spear. There's a whole thing I got on this week that I'd read many years ago, but it was cool to revisit again. It just the high level of certainty. This is actually in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a non-Christian medicine. They did an exhaustive investigation years ago, and there was a lot of things said, but one of the things I found so fascinating was that Jesus was most likely guaranteed dead before the spear went into the heart. He was already dead, just based on how What happens to a body? How long you've been there? All that to say, this is what the Roman soldiers would do to make sure that they were dead. The crucified individual needed to lift their bodies to breathe. If you've not seen this before, it's brutal to talk about. But so they would break their legs and shin, and they would prevent them to be able to pull up their body that would rapidly increase their death by asphyxiation. So again, Strobel and many before have pointed out that this is a reality, that almost all major modern historical and forensic pathologists believe that surviving an ancient Roman crucifixion would have been a medical impossibility. In fact, I did some work in the last 2 weeks to find one. I could find no written evidence anywhere of someone surviving a Roman crucifixion. I'm not saying that there's not there, I couldn't find one. And so when a non-believing medical journal, that is one of the medical journals we all look to for our medical health, says it, and then you have believing people, historians saying it, Jesus was executed and he was dead. So Strobel's first E is execution. Jesus was actually dead after the crucifixion. His second E is this, early accounts. Belief in the resurrection started very early, not as a later myth as some have claimed. A claim sometimes that you'll hear is that the resurrection of Jesus was a legend, that in an argument, I'll give you that there were some people in the first century who believed their Messiah or their leader raised from the dead and made up a bunch of stories, but that came way later. It was in the third, I've heard people say, quote, the 3rd and 4th century and send me the links, and I'm always intrigued by it because I'm like, okay, that's... But that this was a legend, that after multiple generations, it's not what actually happened, and then some people beyond the eyewitnesses that started to create this. Oh, actually, it was raised from the dead. And there are many issues with this claim, but I want to point out two. Strobel notes, the renowned ancient historian, Professor Sherwin White of Oxford University, makes this critical claim, that in the ancient world, it took more than 2 generations, roughly 70 years, for legends to develop to the point that they were completely replaced or could be wiped out. And we can see that in multiple, not just in the positive light, but in the negative light. We can see as different historians have written, and then you see the major writings that have been taken on. We can actually trace those as we found papyri and we found different evidences of how sometimes the winners write history. And so Joe and I were talking about this week. And so it takes a significant amount of time for legend to develop or to wipe out a historical fact. And Strobel notes that in an oral tradition, which is 1st century at that time, there's writing, but oral tradition is still the tradition, that distortions can be introduced. But with the early oral tradition of 1 Corinthians 15:3-7, we know without a certainty of a doubt that there was nowhere near enough time for any sort of length of development. And so I'm going to read 1 Corinthians 15 for us. I'm going to explain how we know for a certain. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3-7 says this. Paul's writing to the Corinthians, the church. He's writing in 53 or 54 AD. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance. I'm going to say that again because it's important. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and then to all the apostles. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3-7 is identified by an overwhelming amount of scholars as early oral tradition, or what you and I would call a creed. It's one of the first creeds, if not, depending on how you view this and where you take an angle from, one of the first creeds we see. In the text, Paul explicitly states he received this formation from others rather than a revelation from the Lord. And we actually get to see in Acts, after Paul comes to Jesus, he goes to talk to who? Peter and John. So he's received these oral traditions, these statements of Christ before he ends up writing to the church in Corinth, rather than creating himself. So scholars date the formation to within this formation, this idea, this creed that's in 1 Corinthians. So he's saying it was received before. Paul didn't make it up in writing. So he's received that. Most scholars take the framework of this formation of creed between 1 and 5 years of Jesus' resurrection, making it a first-hand record of the earliest Christian beliefs sink down in just 4 verses. 4 or 5 verses. Remember, Paul, as I just said, Paul has gone to meet with Peter and John, and after his conversion, and he's taken time to learn, and now he's starting to, in his strength as an apostle and the meeting of Jesus on the road to Damascus, he's now writing this powerful things. And many scholars believe this is when Paul was given this creed, the earliest sayings of the very first apostle who witnessed the resurrection of Jesus. Again, if 1 Corinthians is and this is not, there are some scriptures that are disputed. Sometimes Revelation gets an 890 AD. Some scholars make a claim for 100. Some make a claim for 80. 1 Corinthians is not highly debated at all. 53 to 54, we can pretty much place it. And was within 20 years of Jesus' resurrection. And so one of the things we kind of see there is that this is early evidence of people pointing out that these beliefs can't be legends. These are things that people are talking about in their churches, in their gatherings early. Not 70 years, not 100 years, not 200 years, within 1 to 5 years of Jesus' resurrection that people were having this. So, with that said, Strobel's first E is execution. Jesus was actually dead after the execution, after his crucifixion. His second E is early accounts, believe in the resurrection, started early, not as a later myth, as some have claimed. And 3, his third E, is the empty tomb. The tomb was empty, with no body to refute the claim. In Lee's 2 years of research trying to disprove the resurrection, he made the following comment at one point. So as this comment comes from when he's not a follower of Jesus yet, and he's on the road to this. He says this: "One of my approaches was to try to undermine the empty tomb until I discovered that even the opponents of Jesus implicitly conceded the tomb was empty on that first Easter morning. Perhaps, I reasoned, the body was never entombed in the first place. I have heard some skeptics claim that the Romans didn't allow the burial of crucifixion victims. However, the Digesta, a summary of Roman law, says this." So again, he goes back to not what he feels, not what he thinks, not what he heard. He goes back to the actual first sources. He goes back to this Digesta, which is a summary of Roman law of the time, and it says this: "The bodies of persons who have been punished should be given to whoever requests them for the purpose of burial. In fact, in 1968, archaeologists found the buried remains of a crucifixion victim with a spike still through his ankles." So Lee gives up that one quickly. The tomb was empty, clearly. So the last one, empty tomb. The last one is eyewitnesses. Many people claim to have seen Jesus alive after his death. We have 8, maybe 9. Most people say 9. I'm not convinced of one of them. And so I will say we have 8 or 9 sources, early sources, both inside and outside the New Testament, that confirm Jesus was raised from the dead. We have the 4 Gospels. We have Acts. We have Paul, who tells us about 500 people who saw him at once, and then he urges the Corinthians who are struggling with belief, hey, go talk to them. Again, we've talked about this before. He doesn't say, hey, there's 500 people that saw Jesus, but just trust me. He goes, go talk to them. Don't trust me. Go talk to the eyewitness accounts. So on top of that, we have Ignatius of Antioch, who was an early church father who wrote that he knew people who had seen the risen Jesus. We have Justin Martyr, who confirmed the reports that Jesus appeared to his disciples and that these reports were circulating widely. Again, this is all first century, or early second century, so 105, 110. These are all within this time. We have Polycarp's writing. Polycarp, if you don't know, was a student of Apostle John the Apostle, who referred to the resurrection in his writing, affirming the testimony of the eyewitnesses. So these aren't people that are playing a game and kind of saying, well, I knew a guy who my aunt's sister's friend's cousin said that. It's, no, I sit under the Apostle John. I sat under his leadership. I talked to the people who witnessed the resurrection of Jesus. We could truly spend hours and days looking at just these 4 areas of inquiry, and I'm confident the more that we would look at the actual evidence, the overwhelming answer to the question of who Jesus would continue to point us to, and who Jesus was as the risen Messiah, which is what he said in Luke 24 and John 5. I'm the one you're looking for. I think this is a really powerful thing for us to pay attention to, because what it continues to point to is one of the things that I wrestle with a lot in my early faith. And it wasn't, no one intentionally did this, but one of the things as I wrestled with my doubt, I was told a lot from loving people that, well, following Jesus isn't about facts. It's not about historical data. It's about trusting and having faith. And what I heard in that was, are you saying that faith is just a blind reality, that we're not supposed to actually do this work, we're supposed to just trust? And what I learned is, for some people, this is one of those things that as they come into difficult things that are in the text or are in history, or we see things where Christians are behaving in such an ugly way, that how have they actually met the reason? All these different things that come up, that one of the things that might feel easy to say is, well, we just need to trust. And we do. So it's both. We need to learn to trust in the things that we don't understand. But the scriptures and the history of Christianity over and over and over again shows us that God has created an engagement with humanity. He wants us to think, and he wants us to ask questions, and he wants us not to be afraid to go to the things where there's evidence and look at the evidence and wrestle with it. And he's also okay, and we should be okay with realizing there's a certain thing in mystery that we have to go, oh, I don't know that. But we can, in confidence, that hopefully that produces humility as we talk to others, not oh, look, I've got the evidence and I've got the word, and so I'm going to beat you over the head with it. But I'm always fascinated by that. No, I'm so convinced of this that it's setting my posture and my tone and body to make sure that I am a fragrance of beauty and love and compassion, so that more people can hear about the person of Jesus. And that when things come up, and when people say, well, we don't really know if Jesus really lived, and it's like, oh, we do. I'd love to show you. And again, sometimes you run into, well, I don't want to read the Bible. It's like, okay, you don't have to. I've got multiple sources outside the Bible, and people who aren't necessarily fans of Christians. One of my favorite things to do for years was reading Roman historians from like 100 to like 195. And I went on this journey. I heard it from a professor, and he just kind of challenged, said, you should do this sometime. And I did it over a couple of years. And the amount of times and how many letters we have of Roman historians or Roman emperors or Roman senators writing in annoyance about Christians because of their convictions. There's a letter in 120, 125 of a, it's not a senator, but he's in the Senate somehow, and he's writing about how annoyed he is that the Christians won't join the army. And he lays it out for us. He just goes, why won't they pick up a sword? And they have this converse back and forth because, and so you might not know this, for the first 400 years of the church, you didn't kill people. You didn't pick up the sword to defend. You followed Jesus' words, which was like, I'm enough. And you know where you're going. Like, your life is to give your life away. And so my point is this. We are equipped, men and women. You and I are equipped. We're not going to always have all the answers, but we are overwhelmingly equipped with historical, medical fact from late antiquity. And again, it doesn't always give us all the answers, but it gives us hopefully in you, a beautiful confidence, not an arrogance, a confidence of, oh, this isn't just about how I feel. This is about a thoughtful, historical, life-changing, world-altering event in the person of Jesus. That's why Lewis was so convinced of his three-phrase prong. You don't have any choices other than this. He's a liar, he's a lunatic, or he is your Lord. You get to choose. That's what I loved about Lewis. It was strong, but it wasn't like you have to. He was like, you get to choose, but there aren't any other options out there. He's either crazy, he is a liar, or he is the Lord. So one of my favorite things when I come back to this, we'll close here. One of my favorite things to come back to is just the reality and the confidence of this, is that we have a lot of people in history that died for what they believed in. But they died for believing in something they thought was true. Every single one of the apostles had the opportunity to recount their claim of the resurrection before they were skinned alive, burned alive, killed on a cross upside down. Every single one of them had an opportunity to recount. If the disciples made it up, probably one of the 11 is going to say, hey, yeah. They didn't. They died. They died because they could not say anything different from what they had seen. I've been eyewitness to the one I lived life with for 3 years. And no, he didn't fall asleep in the tomb and pass out and then get up and wake up and readjust his shins and put his ribs back in place, and they just kind of said, hey guys, I know I'm bleeding, but no, he came back. What does the scripture say? In glory and beauty, in someone that we didn't recognize, but we did. They went to the grave with a sense of great conviction. And I love that. And I hope that encourages you. I hope that points your heart and mind towards, at the minimum, a revision to or a reminder of the beauty of this. At the most, I pray if any of you here are struggling with that, that instead of saying, well, I'll get to it, or I pray that you look at the evidence and do the work and come to it with a fresh eyes and go, okay, is this true or is it not?